Welcome to this very first episode of Parenting in the Far North. My name is Ariane Aramburo. I am the mother of one very energetic 8-year-old. Throughout the course of this podcast, we're going to talk about any and all things dealing with being a parent, from screen time, mental health, self-care, and much more. And we're starting today talking about some resources for those dealing with any type of postpartum feelings. Now, this topic is particularly important to me because I suffered from postpartum depression after the birth of my daughter, and getting help made such a difference. My first guest is Joclyn Reilly, who is a perinatal mental health professional. I'd like to introduce my guest today, Joclyn Reilly, mental health therapist with perinatal support at Providence. Joclyn, thank you so much for being here and being one of our first guests for the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I also know you have a lot of other titles under your name. So just give me a quick little rundown of your resume in addition to what you do at Providence.
Sure. At Providence, I'm a mental health therapist, which means I get to see people outpatient, and my specialization is perinatal mental health. So I get to see mostly moms during pregnancy and postpartum. We see a few dads and other support partners. Very seldomly grandparents or another type of caregiver. I also run a mommy support group, and that's once a week on Mondays, called Monday Mamas.
Very familiar with that. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Sure. I teach a class called Happiest Baby on the Block once a month. And outside of my Providence role, I volunteer for Postpartum Support International, and I am the chairperson of the Alaska chapter. I'm also a mom of 3 kids.
I love that. Well, welcome. So let's go back to, let's start with your mom role. This podcast really is kind of piggybacking off of my story after I had my daughter, now who will be 9 this year, which my mind is blown. I can't believe that. But I went through postpartum depression. I did do the Monday Mama support class, which was amazing. And really, and that was when I saw other moms. We were just had our babies and kind of looking at each other wide-eyed, like, did this just really happen? So, everybody was kind of like, oh, you might experience the baby blues. But, in my case, I did experience the postpartum depression. Having a maternal mental health counselor was amazing, and support groups, and also sharing and being an advocate for my story. If you feel comfortable to share, I'm just curious, what was your experience like with your children? Did you experience any PPD during any of your pregnancies?
I have experienced depression and anxiety over my lifetime. And so I would say when I had my first kiddo, it exacerbated some of that stuff. My first one did not sleep very well at all for like a year and a half. So there was some sleep deprivation that certainly caused probably more anxiety symptoms, I would say. And then with my second kiddo, definitely more on the anxiety realm. And I got support by seeing a therapist and reaching out to my community. And certainly doing this job has been very healing.
I would say so. So let's talk about what you do kind of on a daily basis and your support to families and women and new moms. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I only work part-time, which has been wonderful. Providence has been a great support for helping the employees feel like we can be there for our own families while at the same time serving in a really vital role of helping families. And so as a therapist, we have basically 50-minute sessions, and we might be working on adjusting to motherhood. We might be working with dealing with anxiety symptoms. I did get trained in EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. That's a type of therapy to reprocess trauma and help, I like to say, help categorize the trauma so it gets filed away in the correct files in your brain, which I know is not very scientific.
That's okay. It makes sense to us.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So that you're less activated by things that are happening in your environment. So if kids are whining, that can be very triggering, right? Mm-hmm. To be like, oh my gosh, I'm just feeling like, oh, I can't go on with my day because my buttons are being pushed constantly. That I would say is a symptom of a postpartum anxiety if you're just feeling constantly triggered or activated. So a treatment like EMDR can be helpful for that. Basic behavioral techniques maybe I'm getting too in the weeds.
No,
But,
you're good. You're good. Keep going. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
a lot of times we talk about self-care, and I think that gets kind of over talked about in the wrong direction. So when I talk about it, I mean, are you getting the sleep that you need? Are you getting the nutrition that you need? Are you getting space and time away from your kids? We all need that. We all need that relaxation and space and time to just kind of think about your own experience without little ones in your face.
Yeah, and touching mom, and all that. I
Mom,
can
mom, mom.
totally relate to that. When I found a maternal mental health counselor, and I kind of stress that word maternal mental health, that was really important because I think a lot of people think, oh, let me just go to a counselor, which is fine. I'm a big advocate for mental health, but for women and moms in general with PPD and specifically in my case, talk a little bit about how important it is to kind of have that title of seeing a maternal mental health counselor, because they can maybe kind of see some things and notice that maybe others don't.
Yeah. And, again, sometimes a general therapist can be super helpful. It just depends on what's going on and what the situation is. I think someone that is specially trained in what we might call perinatal mental health, which just means pregnancy and postpartum or around pregnancy, that person has that training. They're going to pick up on symptoms that maybe a general therapist isn't going to cue into. There's going to be specialty knowledge about what is typical during pregnancy or what is typical during postpartum, because a lot of those pregnancy symptoms and depression symptoms kind of overlap. So
Yeah.
it's kind of teasing out, like, is this depression during pregnancy, or is this a normal pregnancy where you're feeling tired or you're feeling fatigued, lack of motivation, things like that. Sometimes it can certainly get into the point where, let's say, someone's having scary thoughts, which is common as a new parent, right? You're imagining what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, and these things are coming through your head because you're like, I have to protect my baby, right? So these thoughts are normal to a point. So if you're having some scary thoughts and you tell a therapist, gosh, I'm having some thoughts, these are what the thoughts are. I don't want to put too many specific thoughts out there, but sometimes someone, if they haven't had that specialty training, they might go, oh my gosh, you need to go to the emergency room right now. And that's really not true. So, depending on what's going on, typically those thoughts are a symptom of anxiety that, we can talk about. It doesn't mean you need to go to the ER. It doesn't mean you need to be hospitalized. And we can kind of normalize that a little bit and then figure out, is it happening every day? Is it happening multiple times a day? How disturbing is it to you? And kind of figure that out from there.
And how do we kind of start to have those conversations of normalizing having those thoughts, and especially for new moms to feel comfortable just even like saying it out loud?
Yeah, I think that's where, listening to special like maternal mental health podcasts come into play. Certainly the support group that we talked about briefly, reaching out to certain online groups. Certainly, I think there are certain groups online that where you're not going to get that support, and then there are where you are. So just being cognizant of, what type of organization you're reaching out to. And certainly anyone who's been trained by like Postpartum Support International, or there are a few other organizations that do that training, but just kind of looking at their credentials, like, hey, have they been trained? Do they know what they're talking about? Is that a safe person to talk to?
And I know in Monday Mamas, I remember from 9+ years ago, the topic came up about baby blues and kind of what to expect, going through that. And then it was kind of a different transition after you had the baby. Then it was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of like navigating all these weeds there. So for you running that, you've been running that for how long now?
11 years.
11 years. What do you see with running it prior to, moms having the babies, and then do they come back? Do you see the difference? And, what are some things that you touch on in, the Monday Mama support group?
Yeah, we talk a lot about sleep, and we talk a lot about the transition. We talk about partners and maybe how supportive or not supportive they're being, and their partners are having an adjustment as well. We talk a lot about return to work because it's a time frame. A lot of times people are coming during their maternity leave, so kind of that anxiety about going back to work. What's it going to look like? Trying to find daycare. That kind of leads into another topic, which is some of the bigger issues that are not individual, right? In individual therapy or support group, we can't fix the daycare shortage.
Right.
We can't fix that people don't have paid maternity leave. So things like the bigger topics do come up quite a bit. And I'm like, this isn't your fault that our system is failing moms, basically.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And, a lot of anxiety around that. I see a lot of moms that just, they don't go back to work,
Yeah.
And then they're trying to kind of figure out how to navigate this. And then they have other partners. You mentioned partners. Talk about how partners play a role with new babies, and they go through it too, I feel like, but in their own different way. And then they have to watch and witness maybe if you're experiencing some of these, anxiety and depressions, and they're not quite sure what to do. What do you say to the partners involved?
Absolutely. Yeah. So partners are going through their own experience, whether it's a wife or a dad. And so they have, their own support groups that they could attend. We have a dad's group on Saturdays at Providence that is free. They could just pop in. So it's kind of the counterpart to Monday Mamas. It's called Sat Dads or Saturdays
Sat
with
dads. I love that. Sat dads.
And then Postpartum Support International does run several dad support groups as well that are online. But yeah, it's really interesting because they're typically the mom's biggest support person because they're right there, but they're also having their own experience. So they almost have this double duty of supporting mom, caring for the baby as well, and then they have to care for themselves. So, both parents are having to do all of this thinking and logistical, like, how do I care for me and care for the baby and care for my partner? So it's really both ways. So I think it's really, really important for both people in the partnership to be able to reach out to outside people. It's really not fair to put all of that on your partner to be your only support person. So I think it's really important to reach out to community, other support groups, even if it's just an online community. A lot of people in Alaska are really isolated and they don't have family up here.
Which was, I was going to say, the isolation, living in Alaska, is like a knock in itself. And then you have these long winters, the cold, the dark. And for moms who have their babies maybe during this time, that just adds to that level of anxiety and depression. What do you say, or what advice would you have for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, getting even not even outside, but by the window.
Yeah.
When the sun is up, I'll put up in quotes, around noon, even just like sitting by the window during that light time of day around noon and just like trying to get that sun in your eyeballs can make a difference. And also bringing your baby to the window. Hey, look, sunshine. As we get into February, March, we're going to start to get more sunlight. And so if you're able to go outside for a walk for 10 minutes, that's fantastic. Connecting with other people, even if it's a text to a friend.
Yeah.
Even if your family lives, on the East Coast, we use that Marco Polo app a lot.
Oh, yeah, I have that with some friends.
The only way I can keep in touch with my sister because we're 4 hours different.
Yeah, you can watch it when you want, but you still get a sense that they're there.
So it's a great way to keep in touch with people and just remember that you're not alone. And I think that's the hard part. If people are feeling really isolated, that depression lies, right? The depression tells you you're alone and you're not. So you have to tell yourself, okay, I know I'm not alone. Maybe my family's not available. Maybe I don't have many friends. Who else can I reach out to? And that's where, certainly Postpartum Support International, has a 24/7 hotline, warm line.
Yeah.
Maternal mental health hotline is funded by the federal government, HRSA, and that is also text or phone call 24/7. So lots of people to reach out to and talk to anytime, day or night.
I love that you're not alone. For me, reaching out to friends in addition to going to the counseling and working out, I started my fitness journey. I started doing at-home workouts because trying to lug her to a gym, and that was just getting too hard. And so I was like, I just threw myself into like fitness and physical movement, and that was like I was just like sweating and leaving it all on the floor, and that was a big help for me. My big thing was I struggled with breastfeeding. I wanted to breastfeed. I had it in my mind of like how I was going to do this, and in the hospital after I had her the 3 days, it was great. I had the little nurses, the lactation nurses coming in. I was like, oh, this is wonderful. And then it was when I got home and I just was like, oh, no one's around. No one's coming to bring me ice or check on my vitals. Like I'm responsible for this tiny human. And for me, that's when like it just felt like everything was like, it just came out of nowhere and just hit me. And I just started bawling. And then I was like, what's happening? And then she was crying. And, talk a little bit about some of the breastfeeding struggles and too for moms if you can't or produce, that's okay. I had to go in and have the lactation consultant help me out because I was in pain.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of all or nothing thinking. Sometimes coming into birth, it's like, I have to give birth, quote unquote, naturally, or else I failed. And so that kind of thinking is like, you're just setting yourself up. But it's not you. That's our culture. And that's the message that we're getting in our culture. And then same with breastfeeding. I have to breastfeed or else I failed. Right. So we hear that a lot of this message when people do struggle with feeding, which is very, very common. Most people do, and they're coming in and talking and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like you feed your baby any way you can, and that's what works for you. That's what works for your baby. Then that's what you need to do, whether it's a bottle or breast. We do have lactation consultants at Providence who are fantastic. They're just like my favorite people. And so certainly, there are resources certainly in Anchorage to reach out to if you need help with breastfeeding support. Outside of Anchorage, you can certainly do a phone appointment. It depends on what community you're in, if there's a specially trained lactation consultant, but certainly getting that information.
And make sure, like you were saying, vetting and making sure it's the right information and the right people that are helping you out.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into talks about medication and breastfeeding. And most medications are safe for breastfeeding. So sometimes you'll still hear like, oh, it's not safe to take Zoloft, but it is. It is safe. It's been studied for over 20 years. And so really making sure you're getting the correct information on, if you're on a medication, it's probably okay. But certainly if you're on it during pregnancy, it's okay during nursing.
During breastfeeding, yeah. You mentioned you were volunteer with Postpartum Support International. Alaska has a chapter. Talk a little bit about that and what they offer and what you all do.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of direct services. It's more trainings for providers in the community. So we have an upcoming training in April. We haven't quite opened the registration yet, but it's going to be April 11th and 12th. It'll be 2 days of the components of care. So we're going to have the speakers from Postpartum, big PSI we call them, Postpartum Support International, the Central. They're going to fly into Alaska and do 2 days of training. Then we're going to have an all-day training in advanced psychotherapy for this population, and then an all-day training in advanced psychopharmacology.
Wow.
So we got some grant funding from the Alaska Mental Health Trust and for travel scholarships as well, so we can have people from all over Alaska fly in to do those trainings. I'm very excited about that. And then we're going to have 2 days of perinatal loss and bereavement. So, and that one's limited to 100 participants.
For PSI, the Alaska chapter, is that something that local like moms can get involved with as volunteers, or is that more folks who have the titles of like, counselors and doctors and physicians and things like that? If people want to get involved or lend their support in any kind of way.
Yeah, if people want to volunteer, they can certainly email. It's really for anyone. That's one of my favorite things about volunteering for PSI is you can. I'd say most people that volunteer for them have had some sort of experience themselves. Not all. Some people are specialty, in this field and are just super interested in it, really into it. But yeah, there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. So I also volunteer as a local coordinator. So if someone calls the helpline and that maybe they're talking to a volunteer from PSI who lives in Texas, we'll say, and then they say, well, I'm looking for a local, I'm looking for some local help. Then they'll say, oh, I'm going to connect you with Joclyn in Anchorage since you live in Anchorage, and she'll make sure you get connected to the local resources. so that I contact that person. It's a lot of time by text is their preferred mode of contact. So I text them and say, hi, I live in Anchorage too. Are you looking for a therapist? Are you looking for a support group? What are you looking for? And then I'll give them a list of 3 or 4 therapists who take their insurance, who I happen to know have openings. So we kind of have a running list of who's doing what, to try to keep, a finger on the pulse so that people aren't running into dead ends. Because the last thing you want is someone to reach out for help and then they're like, I called 4 people, nobody has openings, or they don't take my insurance, or they're not even calling me back.
Yeah.
And that's very disheartening for people. So I want to make it as easy as possible for them and encourage them to get involved with some of the support, either my support group or one of the online support groups, whatever's going to work for them.
So, Joclyn, let's talk a little bit about the support that you all offer. What would you tell folks out there, a mom or a family member listening and saying, hey, I think this would be great for X person? Where do they start? What do they do? What do you offer for them?
Yeah, we just opened our brand new clinic. We moved out of the Children's Hospital, and now we're just kind of across on Piper Street, so still on campus at Providence in Anchorage. And it's called Perinatal Support, which, as we talked about, means pregnancy and postpartum, and it's outpatient counseling. So the other clinician that we have with us, Whitney, is her second career. She joined our clinic specifically because she wanted to work with this population and work in this field, and she's so wonderful. And then we have 2 clinical interns who also went back to school after a previous career so that they could focus on in this population. So it's really exciting. But so there's the 4 of us right now, and we provide outpatient therapy. Our phone number is 907-212-2014. And so anyone can call and make an appointment if they feel like this sort of service would be helpful for them, or if they want to touch base and are curious about anything, we're happy to touch base with them. I think I've heard a lot from patients that they really like the new office because they can just drive up on Piper Street, park right there, and walk right in the building. And so they don't have to deal with walking through the hospital, which they did before. And that our offices are a little bit bigger. We have nice bigger windows, and that sort of thing. It's a little more refreshing.
I love that. And for the Monday Mamas, obviously it's on Monday, but again, what time does that run? And then you said for dads, Saturday dads, what time is that?
Yeah, Monday Mamas is at 11 o'clock in person, and that's still at entrance number 5 on Health Drive. And those, we're hoping to keep continuing that people register online before they come. So when they register online, if you Google Parenting with Providence, Monday Mamas, or something like that, it should pop up. And then same for Sat Dads. That's at 9 o'clock on Saturdays. But pre-registration is great because then we know how many people are coming. If nobody registers, it does auto cancel.
Okay,
so
so register.
Person doesn't show up.
What do you get out of the work that you do?
I love how every day is different. I love hearing people's stories, which is probably another reason I like listening to podcasts. I love hearing people's stories, and then I know that I'm helping people, and that feels good at the end of the day to just feel like, okay, I know I made a difference, even if they're not magically better in one session. I know that I made at least a little bit of a difference. And our kids don't say like, thanks, Mom, you're doing great. But I do have patients say thank you. So, it really does feel good.
I love that. And, what would you say as we kind of wrap things up to a mom listening or someone who just had a baby or they're kind of feeling all the feels and trying to navigate, motherhood? What would be something that you can say that could resonate with them or you hope that they'll take to heart and take away?
Yeah, certainly that they're not alone. I think a lot of times people question, like, do I have depression or anxiety? You don't have to know in order to make an appointment and talk with someone, right? You don't have to have a diagnosis in order to come to the support group. You can just be like, I just want some extra support. That's it. There's no qualification on, making an appointment or coming to the group. So really, if you want extra support, make an appointment, come to support group, reach out. you're certainly not alone. There are so many people
Yes.
out there that want to help. It's such an amazing field to be in. It's just very positive vibes, not toxic positive, but yeah, it's really wonderful and it's growing. I'm hoping our clinic can grow more, perinatal support can grow more, and it will. But just the field of perinatal mental health and the number of people we're hoping to train in April is maybe high goals, but I'm really looking forward to having providers from all over the state of Alaska get trained specially so that they can really be there for those moms in Juneau and I don't know why I picked on Juneau, but
Sorry, all over the state. Yeah,
all
it's
over
a
the
big
state.
state. It's a big state, and not just specifically Anchorage, but to be able to flood those resources out. And you mentioned you are not alone. I can certainly attest to that because that's I was like, am I the only one feeling this way? And then until I started talking about and sharing my story and hearing from other moms, I was like, oh, I'm not. And I think COVID, going through the pandemic, really kind of blew the lid off of mental health and making it and normalizing it. And so I just hope we can continue in that direction, even for new moms and mamas and even dads too. We can't forget the dads; they're affected in a different way, or your partners in general. But that we are normalizing that it's okay to, if you had a baby and you're not feeling too great, to talk and tell someone that is totally okay. And I hope that we can, it's conversations like this that'll continue that train and it just be like, oh, what'd you do Saturday? That's the next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
So, any final thoughts or words before we end? Before I let you go, I know we could sit here and talk mamas and this all day. It's definitely a topic I'm, passionate about. But I'll let you. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. One more thing I'll say is that the other rewarding thing about this field is that our brains are changing so much during pregnancy and postpartum that they're just malleable. Mm-hmm. So when you get the help, you get better quickly. It's so amazing to see.
Well, Joclyn, thank you for being our guest and taking the time to talk with us. I had a wonderful time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to thank Joclyn again for joining me today. This is a new podcast, and we appreciate your support. So don't forget to like and subscribe.